Welcome to the Only God Stories podcast, where we believe testimonies are powerful. In this podcast, your faith will be built as we hear from people from all walks of life who recognize the power of God in their lives. To hear more testimonies or for the opportunity to share a story of your own, check us out on our website at onlygodstories.org.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Only God Stories podcast. We are just getting started for the year, and let me just tell you, we're already having so much fun, and we're thrilled that you're here to be a part of it with us. And today we're sitting down with Jenny Mars, who is local with Dave and Jenny Mars both typically, but Dave's going to be out today. But they're local to the Northwest Arkansas area, and they bring so much value and life to our community. And you may be more familiar with their captivating show on HGTV, as well as Discovery Plus, Fixture to Fabulous. And the more that I continue to be able to read the story of the Mars family, the more I recognize just the intentionality and how they lead their lives. And so whether that's a berry farm or one of the most recent celebrations, the release of the book, House Plus Love Equals Home, man, I am so excited to be able to celebrate that because that's a big deal. But Tiffany, give us a little bit of a snapshot into this book, and then we'll be able to dive in to hear what the Only God story is that we get to hear today.
Yeah, so Jenny, your book. Now I am a big fan of e-readers, honestly, but your book is meant to be held. So I have it right here. Everybody, like if you get this book, get the hard copy. It's amazing. It's an actual book. Like it's a true book. Like it's an authored book, but it's also like it feels like a magazine on the pages, and the pictures on here are incredible. And Jenny, you do such an amazing job of really inspiring people to I'm not going to say decorate their homes, but have their homes be a representation of their heart. And some of that is through decor. Some of that is through really easy, affordable tips of how to make their home somewhere that they're comfortable with having their family or people over. And it's such a beautiful book. And also throughout the book, I gotta say, Dave has his appearances. Yes, appearances.
Dave's there.
I really appreciated the feature wall guest appearance because I love a good feature wall. But outside of that, man, it was such an amazing book. I highly recommend it. And you really bring the reader in on your journey and with your family. And there's a beautiful thread of that throughout the book. And you even touch on part of the story that the reason that we even asked you to be on this podcast. You touch on your adoption story throughout the book. But you do so in a way, as my husband was saying before we jumped on, that it just feels like we just got coffee together and you just shared part of your life story and the lessons you've learned along the way. So thank you so much for this book. And for the listeners, you should absolutely get this book. And if you do get this book, I just encourage everybody to go and bless the Mars by writing a review online. So wherever you buy it, write that review and bless them in that way, just like you will be blessed by this book. Now, while we set a framework for your intro, Jenny, I would just love to give you the opportunity to kind of fill it in for us. Tell us a little bit more about what you do, your family, and just a little bit more about yourselves.
Well, thank you. That was very kind. I love what you said about the book because that was when I was writing it. All the things you said were my intentions behind writing it. So that makes me really happy. Okay, so yes, Dave and I have been married, oh my gosh, almost 19 years. It's nuts. Oh my word. And we have 5 kids. We have lived in Northwest Arkansas since 2004. We moved here. It's a long story, but when we came, we had the intention of being here for 2 years. Like I think a lot of people say when they move here, I'll come for a couple years for work or whatever.
It's an amazing area, I gotta say.
We loved it and we just stayed, and now it's home, and we couldn't imagine ever living anywhere else except maybe a vineyard in Tuscany. I always say, like,
we all have our dreams.
Your travels in the book.
We do love to travel. That is one thing. So we have 5 kids. The oldest boys are in 8th grade now. They'll be starting high school next year.
Oh my goodness!
It's 4. I know, and our youngest will be starting kindergarten next year. So we have the full spectrum. But we do really, so we have a building business that we've had since 2004. The reason we moved here originally was just for Dave and his dad and brother to start building together. He grew up in Colorado. I grew up in Florida, ended up here. That's a long that is a God story, but a long one. It's fine. And so, yeah, we have the 5 kids and we have the building business. And in 2016, I believe it was, we had a network executive from HGTV contact us. Just she had known about our area. She knew about Bentonville and how it's just this unique small town that also has so much culture and so much. It's just such a unique place. It really is for us. For being and so she knew about it, and she was asking around the area for builders, and got our name and contacted us. And we said we did not want to do a show at the time. Our kids were 6, 4, and 2, and our daughter had only been home from the Congo for 2 years. We were still sort of in trauma mode, survival mode at that point. We were just starting to come up for air after 2 years of her being home. And we were like, there is no way we could go on. What? No, we're not. No. But then it took about a year and a lot of back and forth. And eventually we agreed to do a pilot. And it was actually, now I think about it, it was a full year. It was the summer of 2017. We did the pilot. And then they picked it up for a season, which we were told, if you do the pilot, there's like 1 in a million chances of it getting picked up. It'll just be a fun thing you guys can do. You'll have this for your family forever. It'll be a great experience, and that'll be it. And then that's how we went into it, because we were like, if we went into it thinking, oh, this is going to be something, we would have definitely not done it. So we agreed to do the show. They picked it up. We did the first season. It was crazy because the network got purchased. And so there was all these changes internally. I also found out I was pregnant with Luke right at the end of filming. And
oh my goodness.
You just needed more to happen that was new at the same time. Yeah.
And I was like, there's no way I'll be able to film and be pregnant, because it's like when we're filming, it's incredibly crazy and demanding. And I just like, there's no way. So anyway, it ended up taking about a year until the next fall, full year till the show aired, because of all the changes at the network. And so I was able to have my whole pregnancy. I had Luke. He was, I think, 4 months old when the show finally aired. And then we didn't start filming for a couple more months. So he was about 6 months old when we started filming, which was amazing because I had all that time at home with him that I wasn't expecting to get. Then we started filming season 2, and it's been consistent ever since then. But we just finished season 5, and unofficially, we're not allowed to say, but we're working on something else next season. We're not, it hasn't been, but yeah.
Well, I'm excited already to hear what that is. Now, Jenny, obviously, family is very important to you. I think we see that interlaced into everything that you guys do, and really, adoption's played a huge part of your story. And I know there's a lot of it. I mean, there's really a heart-wrenching and rocky process within a lot of that, but you've deemed this a miracle. And so I'd love to hear you take us all the way back to the beginning. And when did you first really feel led to adoption? And just take us to that spot and set the stage for us.
Yeah, Dave and I knew we always knew adoption. Well, we thought we would want adoption to be a part of our family somehow. We actually started the adoption process. I don't know, before we had the twins. I don't remember. It was probably 2008 at that time. We started the process. And then I got pregnant with the twins, so we put our process on hold. And that was a whole long thing too, but we put a process on hold. When the boys were about 18 months old, we decided to open our paperwork, our file back up, and get everything updated. And at that point, we were on a waiting list for a child in Ethiopia. The Ethiopian program had just opened, and when the few years before we had the boys, we had gone through a couple years of infertility. We knew we wanted to adopt, so we were like, do we adopt first? What do we do? We were at the point where we were just confused as to God's plan for our family. And I ended up I had this dream one night, and it was just one of those so vivid. I'll never forget it. I was standing at the counter at the island, and there were all these kids running around. It was just like, the like chaos when there's a lot of kids in the room. There's laughter. And
Yeah.
it's like
The beautiful chaos. Yeah.
Beautiful chaos.
And
Yeah.
I remember waking up and just crying and sobbing because it was such a promise to my heart because we had been trying so hard to have a child. However, whether it was through adoption or biologically, and at that point, every adoption door was closing, and then we weren't having anything. Nothing was happening. I just thought, are we ever going to have a child? And so God gave me this vision, and in that there was all these kids, and I remembered specifically seeing one really, really blonde little boy and one really dark-skinned little girl. And I woke up and I woke Dave up, and I was like, our daughter is going to be in Africa. I know our daughter's, that's the only thing I knew out of that was like, there's going to be a lot of kids somehow. I don't know. Are they the friends? Who are these kids? But I do know we have a daughter in Africa. And it was so clear. And so when we started the process, then I got pregnant with the boys, which again, a crazy miracle story too. But then when we started again, we decided Ethiopia was open. It was a pretty steady international program, which international adoption is tumultuous always.
Yeah.
But the Ethiopian program at that point was moving pretty steadily. So we had a great agency that we had a lot of friends that had worked with them. We had here in Northwest Arkansas, we had a group of moms that I got to know that had Ethiopian kiddos. Like there was already the kind of culture here with all these kids. And so it just felt like, okay, this is so right. This is awesome. So we got on the wait list and waited almost, I would say probably 6 months, maybe 9 months at that point. And then I got an email about a waiting child so the waiting child list, I was on this list from before. I would get these emails sporadically and saw them, but never really paid much attention because I knew we were on this wait list. I was like, it's not like every time I opened the email, I'm like, oh, this is our kid. No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was more like I opened it and I'm like, would pray for those kids and then I'd move on. And so I opened this email and Sylvie was on this list and she was the first face that on my email. I opened it up. I was sitting at work. I worked in corporate America at the time because Dave was still building his business and I had to have a real job, we always say. So I called Dave and I was like, I don't know. I just knew it was our girl. And I was like, Dave, this is our daughter. I found her. And he's like, what are you talking about? Because, we had just finished all our paperwork, which for international adoption is really extensive. It took us about almost a year to do all the paperwork to get on the wait list. Then we had been waiting at that point almost 6 months or so. So we're about a year and a half in on the wait list. Anyway, I go and meet him at the job site. We sit in the car, we call the agency because we didn't actually know where she was located and we didn't know anything about her.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is my daughter, but know nothing at this point. That's a step of faith. That's a step of faith.
We find out she's in the Congo, in Democratic Republic of Congo, and she's with a different agency, of course, at that point. So what that meant was we had to start all over. We had to do all of our paper.
Oh, wow.
We had to update all of our paperwork. But in terms of payment, we had already paid everything to our agency, for the agency fees and all that. So now we had to lose all that money. We'd start over with a new agency. We had to update all of our paperwork, which meant going back to our government and getting approval for a new country program. It's like these, it's the extensive paperwork. It's like doing your taxes times 1,000,000. I can't even.
Plus all the emotional toll alone.
Right.
It's got to be.
Right. That's extreme.
So we decided, okay, so we'll think about it. We'll pray about it. And we were like, yes, we accepted her referral the next day. We both really felt she was our daughter. We accepted the referral. And then I got in touch with, the thing about adoptive moms is they should work for the FBI because we can find any information. So I ended up finding
Duly noted.
I don't know how we did this, but we knew everything. So I found some other moms whose kids were at the same orphanage as Sylvie, and they were in the process and who were with our agency. And I just found out, the program we were in with Ethiopia was run by a really reputable agency. The home where the kids were waiting was really the kids were well cared for in that waiting time, all of that. And so I felt really comfortable with that Ethiopia program. So then this Congo program, we found out Sylvia was in an orphanage that was absolutely horrific. I just heard absolute horror stories. And then found out really that the program itself was just unstable. I just found a lot of stuff out that night, that it was like a full 24-hour period of not sleeping, praying, talking to other families. And then finally, we had our referral fee due at the end of that week, which was a big chunk of money. I can't remember. It was thousands of dollars. It was a lot. And I had been up all night and just really, and now I feel like it was 100%, it was the enemy attacking, I think, because I was like, it was just this physical, like, I just was sick. I just couldn't, I don't know. I was so torn and in such turmoil over if this is the right path and if this is really our daughter and if we're going to really step into this, because it was almost like I knew we were stepping into just a huge spiritual battle. And I didn't know if I was hearing God right or if I was just thinking, oh, this is a really cute little girl. And I wanted to really discern that because it was a huge decision. So, prayed and prayed, and we both did, prayed and prayed. And so Dave had to go. He left for work that day. And at this point, I was home with the boys that day. The boys were 2. And all day I was like, we gotta tell them by 5 p.m. that, because we had decided, that morning we decided, Dave and I both were like, no, this is not right. We're going to stay on our wait list. We're going to stay the course, stay with the plan. And so Dave said, can you call them today and let them know? And I was like, I can't, I need you to come home because I can't do that because I can't say no to her. I know you're right. This is the smart thing to do. This is the rational thing to stay on our path. But I feel like I won't be able to call them. I need you to come home and we'll do it together. It was just too emotional. And so he's like, no, that's fine. I'll come home. We'll call them together. So anyway, 5 o'clock passes, 6 o'clock passes. Dave's not home. He's not answering his phone. I'm like, what in the world is happening? He finally gets home. And I'm like, Dave, we missed the deadline. Like, what are we going to do? And he's like, Johnny, he's like, she's our daughter. I'm like, what? And he just puts a check on the table. And he's like, he had forgotten in the midst of all the craziness of that week. He had forgotten he had a closing. So obviously he's a builder. So we're always buying, selling property and this and that. He had bought a piece of land with a friend, with their business partner of ours, who's a friend. And they had a closing on that land that they had sold it. And he had forgotten about the closing, which is never something he's ever done because you're going somewhere and somebody's going to pay you. You'll show up, right?
Yes.
So and on his way home, his friend, Craig, called and was like, where are you? You're supposed to be here at the closing. And Dave's like, oh my gosh, I totally forgot. So he went there, didn't call me because he didn't want to upset me and tell me he was going to be late. So he was hoping he'd get it done, get down and be able to come home. Well,
in and out,
would check again. He just was so out of it, not realizing, had just forgotten all about this. He handed the check and it was the exact amount. I think it was a penny off of what we owed, or $1 off.
Wow, praise God.
Of what we owed for the referral fee. And Dave was like, because we just were praying, like, I know, and I know that, you're not supposed to ask God for signs or anything, but then I look back at, there are examples in the Bible where God does clearly show, like, hey, yes, this
absolutely.
And so we kept saying, like, Lord, show us, like, help us to know for sure. Like, how can we know for sure? And he didn't say, give us the signs, but we just said, show us, like, help us to know. Help us to clear discernment. And when he did that, we were like, yes, this is our daughter. And that was just the first example. There were so many examples of things like that happened throughout the 2 years of trying to get Sylvie home, because it was the most tumultuous, hard, horrible, horrific 2 years ever. And if God didn't keep showing up in such clear ways, I think we would have just been in total despair. And so I think he gave us those little nuggets to keep us going and to keep us with hope. And so it took 2 years. She was legally our daughter. She had her American passport. She had her visa. Our adoption was finalized. She had she didn't have her American birth certificate yet. The only thing, she had her visa, passport, and a final adoption. We had met her several times, and the country closed down at that point, like a month right before she was supposed to come home. And they said, no more children can leave the country for international adoption. And I think there were, I don't remember the exact number. I think there were like 800 kids just from the US, but worldwide, there were thousands of kids that were stuck there who were in the adoption process. And I mean, again, she was legally our daughter. So there were a lot of families American families that we knew, friends of ours that moved to the Congo so that their kids could live with them because that was the only way for them to be together. But I had gotten pregnant in that meantime, again, like a total surprise with Charlotte. And so I couldn't go back to the Congo because I had a high risk pregnancy because of complications from the boys. And so my prior pregnancy, so I wasn't able to go back. So Dave was going back and forth while I was pregnant and we couldn't go there. I mean, I could not deliver in the Congo. It was not safe. So we just would have to go, he was going back and forth. We were doing FaceTime. We couldn't go there. We also had 2 young boys. It was just not a safe place for them to be. So we chose not to go there. We had to wait here, but it was horrible. It was so excruciating. And she was sick often. She had, malaria multiple times and typhoid fever and all these, I mean, she was just sick all the time. And it's just that, we never knew if she had anything to eat that day. And we just really never, it was just truly one of a surrender to God for your child, because I didn't know if she would ever come home, number one. And I didn't know if she would be alive every day to day. Like I would check, afterwards I had such PTSD because every night I would wake up in the morning because it would, with the time difference, I'd always wake up at 3 a.m. and check my phone and just to see if there were any messages about her from anyone. Most often there wasn't any updates, but I always was scared that something was going to happen. And so, and like, I didn't sleep for years and years and years. At 3 a.m. I was always up. We had found her a foster home, with a Congolese friend of ours who also she had 6 children of her own, and she was taking in all these foster kids. Her husband had passed away, but she was a saint. And so she had Sylvie in her home, which was amazing. But again, she started taking in all these other foster kids because all these kids were stuck. It was really hard for her to care for it. And at one point she had like 18 kids in her home. So she wasn't in the orphanage anymore because the orphanage was truly horrific, but she was also in a place that also wasn't fantastic.
Ideal. Yeah.
And we had talked to Laura, who was her foster mom, eventually, and we're like, okay, we're at a point where we're gonna just support her whole life. We'll send money for her to go to school, and we just basically gave up hope that she was coming home. And that's when, literally out of the blue, God there were 3 kids that were able to come home, and she was one of them. We got the call on July 5th. And she was home on July 9th. Dave was going to go get her, but his visa had expired. We didn't even realize it. We thought it was up to date, but then we went to book the tickets and we were like, oh my gosh, it's expired. So we were panicking, and we had her go in and petition for permission to bring Sylvie home, which was not allowed. Like the fact that they let her leave, number one, but then that they let her leave with her foster mom, not her parents. It was super unprecedented. So they gave her permission to bring Sylvie home. So Laura got on a plane for the first time in her whole life, on a plane, flew to America with this 2-year-old who's traumatized and scared and all the things that and Laura got stuck in customs when she landed in Chicago. She missed her flight here because she had brought in her suitcase.
I read this in your book.
Oh yeah. She had brought all of the makings of a dinner she wanted to cook for us when she arrived.
Produce. Not good for customs.
She had fish. And it was just
all
so
the
precious.
things.
I cringed. I was like, oh no.
I know. It's like so precious that she thought to do that. It was so kind.
Yeah.
But then also she was stuck in customs. We didn't know where. We couldn't get a hold of her. We were panicking because she also she spoke English, but she didn't speak great English, and she was traveling and she had been really sick on the flight when they were in Brussels. Laura called me and said she didn't know if she'd be able to get on the next flight because she was so sick. So when they were in Chicago, we had no idea where they were, if they were even there. I was panicking. And then another adoptive mom was visiting her kid in Congo, her child, and she saw Sylvie with Laura. She knew Sylvie because she knew me because we were all connected at that point, all the moms, and helping one another. And she went in to the customs room and basically fought to get Laura and Sylvie out.
Come on.
So she was amazing, and she was sending me photos, and she called me and gave me the update. Then we got them rebooked. They got here, and Laura was able to stay for a week, which was amazing because it was really great for Sylvie's transition to have Laura here. It helped her to feel safe. But one of the really cool God stories is that we always, when we're renovating our home especially, we always write Bible verses on the wall before we paint and on the floors before we lay flooring and pray over the spaces. And so Sylvie and Charlotte were sharing a room, a nursery, and I had written above Sylvie's bed, your daughters will be carried home, your children will come from far lands, your daughters will be carried home. And I'll look it up, the exact verse, Isaiah. But I'd written that one on the wall above her bed. And the fact that she literally was carried home by Laura, I mean, she came in, she was carried to us, which we were not expecting because that was not allowed. We were always planning to go there. It truly, like, just that small detail of how good God is and he's in every detail was amazing. And the fact that Laura was able to come here and be here and help us, she went to all the doctor's appointments with me at the beginning and translated for Sylvie because Sylvie didn't speak English or understand English. And so it just really was just so many beautiful details that God orchestrated in a way that I could have never planned.
So amazing. And I just need to add real quick, because as you were sharing that story, especially when, I mean, you had the money in hand that day that you needed to almost the merest penny. And what I was thinking whenever you shared that is how adoption is costly. And I think it's a beautiful reminder for us, though, our adoption was costly. And so for anybody who's listening and listening to this story, like, God's adoption for you was costly, but you counted it worth it, and you are worth it, and you are loved. And so I just wanted to add that in here because adoption stories are so beautiful to me.
Yes.
And mainly because of just the biblical adoption and how important it is in the Bible. So Jenny, that was all amazing. And like, wow, so many goosebump moments. That's not the first dream we've had on the podcast. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. But now I just have to ask, because it was so hard and you had given up hope at one point, what would you say to people who, because we know people who are going through adoption stories as we speak, who are even trying, where does the money come from? How are we going to do this? And reaching out and trying to get that help. But what would you say to the people who are in similar situations, whether adoption or something else, that they're starting to lose hope? What's your encouragement to them?
I mean, I think at the end of the day, we have a very real enemy. And I think that our process taught me more about spiritual warfare and the realm of spiritual happenings that we cannot see, like the veil, there that we can't see what's happening. Think of like Elijah with the chariots surrounding him. And like, we have no idea what's happening in the spiritual realm. And I think for me, that's what our adoption taught us, because there were so many times that there was times when I would wake up because I felt like somebody was sitting on me and choking me. And that night that
happened,
it was like a very real physical attack. And I woke up and I couldn't breathe. And I felt like someone was on top of me. And I just had, the only thing I could do was say the name of Jesus. And it sounds insane to anyone who's not a believer, but it was so real. I found out, I ended up checking right after like that all passed. I checked my phone and Laura had messaged me that they got Sylvie out of the orphanage in that moment when that was happening. And it was a actual battle. Like, she had to go with police escorts to get Sylvie out of the orphanage because they didn't want her to leave the orphanage, because that meant for them that I wouldn't be sending money. And that was all they viewed children as. I agreed, if she got out of the orphanage, I would still send them their money, even if she wasn't there. I didn't care about that. I wanted her out of there so she was safe.
Yes.
In that actual moment that I was physically, like, I woke up from a deep sleep of someone feeling like they're sitting on me. And that was the exact moment when she literally got, was rescued, I would say rescued from the orphanage, because it was such a horrific place. And I think just those moments, knowing that there is a very real God who is bigger and more powerful, and there is also a very real enemy who is always going to come against what God is for, and he is for adoption. And things like adoption, the enemy hates things. anything that's beautiful, the enemy hates. And so he's always going to come against, and he's going to come against in ways that sometimes just presents itself as doubt. And am I doing this right? Of course, the first question in the Bible, did I hear God correctly? So I think always remembering and not being afraid. I don't think that there's a reason to be scared of the enemy, because Jesus and God is so much bigger. I don't say that to cause any sort of fear, because I think that that's the power of it, is the power of who God is, how much bigger he is. But also remembering that the reason you're starting to feel like you're losing hope is because there is a real enemy trying to prevent what you're doing. And if he's trying to prevent it, in all honesty, that means that it's because God is for it. And if you're following God's will, I mean, there's obviously examples of things that you're doing that are just but if you follow God's will and you feel every door keeps slamming, everything keeps going wrong, your car's broken down, your kids are sick, everything is going wrong, and you feel like, God, do you even see me? It's actually probably the enemy trying to make you feel that way, and you have to cling to what you know. And what I always did and what I always do still is go back to who God is. And I have a journal where I'll just write, the characteristics of God just over and over, like who God is, because if you know who he is in every situation, he's still who he is. His character doesn't change. I heard somebody say, and I wrote it down, and I always go back to it, is God does not author pain. God is only good. And so if something bad is happening, like when Sylvie was stuck, I don't believe that was God's timing. I don't believe it was God's providence. I don't believe God wanted that so that we could learn more about him and who he is, even though those things happened in that process. But he was wanting her home with us. He didn't want that pain. It was the enemy who was coming against, and there was so much evil being in where she was. She was surrounded by so much corruption and so much evil, and so that
he can use it, but that doesn't mean that he
will use
desired that for you.
It says he'll use all things together for good, right?
Yeah.
So he doesn't author pain, and the story isn't over yet. I always would say the story's not over yet. I don't know what it is, and it doesn't always have to tie up in a beautiful bow. I think that's the hard thing. Because as the longer you live, you realize there are just hard things. It's just hard. The world is hard. The world is broken. And even now, adoption is so beautiful, but it is rooted in brokenness. It is rooted in a deep fundamental loss. It is not sunshine and roses every day at our house. Still to this day, there's still so much trauma and brokenness in Sylvie's, who she is, in the first 2.5 years of her life, what her brain, the broken pathways in her brain, that love cannot restore the extent of the trauma that she experienced. But I think that's part of the story too, is that it's not sunshine and roses. Like as soon as she comes home, it's not like, oh, hallelujah.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. There's so much beauty. We've had a front row seat to so much redemption in her life and in our own lives. And we've all grown closer to the Lord because of it. And God has worked in all of it, but it is hard. It's still hard. It's always going to be hard. Like I always, and she's been home, now since 2014. So I don't think that if you feel like you're looking at, the pretty pictures on Instagram and everybody's smiling and you're feeling like, well, what happened to my life? Like what
about me?
happened?
Yeah.
My life doesn't look like that. That's not reality. There's just hard in the world. And I think if you know the character of God, he will make all things new. It's not always going to be tied in a bow. It's not always going to be this side of eternity. But you just have to keep trusting and keep walking in step with him and keep looking for those little glimpses of goodness and joy that he brings. Because every day we're surrounded. We're just not looking. We're not looking for them.
So good.
I think it's really good. And, as I hear you, as I listen to you, I do think about the person that feels hopeless. It feels like, hey, everything's gone. And what a beautiful picture of being able to remind us of both how big God is, how real the enemy is, but then to be able to declare the very names of who God is and his true identity, because as you said, his character doesn't change. And so for our listeners today, whether you're in the waiting game or whether you feel like your hope is lost and you're like, my life doesn't look like I want it to, or like it looks on somebody else's Instagram feed where they have the best of the best. May we remind you that, man, God sees you, he cares for you, and he wants good for you in the process. And so, Jenny, I'm thankful for you sharing the story and the journey of how God has moved on your behalf and your family's behalf. But even more than that, I'm thankful for just you sharing the obedience journey that you've been on, because that's what one of our first podcast episodes, literally the phrase was said that the miracle is found in the obedience. And that's what I see again in this episode, is that the miracle is found in the obedience and the perseverance there. And so to our listeners, thank you again for being on the podcast. We invite you to like, to subscribe, and to share, so we can continue to be able to share the stories of how God is moving in each other's lives and encourage your faith, our faith, and those that are listening as well. So Jenny, thank you again for being on the podcast. Such an honor to have you here. We miss Dave. Tell him maybe we'll get him on the next one. We are so thankful to be able to have you on again. So once again, thank you so much for being on the Only God Stories podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Only God Stories podcast. Be sure to follow us on social media as we share more stories like these, and don't forget to check out our website at onlygodstories.org for more information on how you can share how the power of God has moved in your life.